And please welcome my very special guest, Assistant Secretary General and CEO of the UN Global Compact. It's Sanda Ojiambo.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sanda, thank you so much for joining me here. Davos 2022 rescheduled because of the pandemic. How does it feel to be here? And what messages are you hearing on the ground?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it is just great to be here. 2 years of convening virtually, if we did convene virtually, I think has probably had its end place. I think it's time to get out and meet in person. And it's great to be able to do that here in Davos. There's a lot of key messages. The last global convening we had was certainly COP26 in Glasgow, when there was a key focus on climate and the climate crisis, the urgency to keep the 1.5 degree target in sight, but also the need to address the unfulfilled promises. And I think perhaps the expectation coming into Davos this year may have been how to address the post-pandemic recovery and rebuild, and also perhaps to train the eye back on the climate crisis. But certainly we find ourselves also amidst a war that threatens to have long-term consequences on issues such as food system stability, certainly the energy crisis, and really just relooking at the social fabric and what that means globally. But the key messages for me still remain the same. The Sustainable Development Goals remain our North Star. I think we do need to keep focus on how collectively government, private sector, civil society can address these really pressing issues. And amidst them all are actually things that are central to the current war: the energy transition, securing food systems, securing equity and equality around the world.
Talking of the public and private sector, do you think there's the will and the finance to put action behind the words?
I want to talk on the finance bit because that has come up so much in these last couple of days. No one has said that there's a lack of resources. What it is how are we directing finance towards sustainable development issues? And I think the opportunity lies really to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and the issues at hand as investment opportunities. And that, I think, is the messaging that we need to give the private sector. You can invest in the energy transition. You can invest in building resilient and robust food systems and agricultural systems. The scale of what we need to address is not about philanthropic responses. It's really about making strategic investments and building systems and supporting transformation. And I think that really is the call, for big businesses that are here, for investors, for asset managers and asset owners to seize the investment opportunities around the challenges.
Sanda, as Assistant Secretary General and CEO, tell me about the work of the UN Global Compact and also what you're hoping to achieve here.
Right. So, the UN Global Compact was actually established, and interestingly enough, here at Davos, the then Secretary General Kofi Annan talked about building this compact that would bring the human face to the global market, just over 20 years ago. And really what we aim to do is build a cohort of, responsible, principle-based businesses that run their businesses responsibly, but also do good business. And fundamental to that is to say that profit and purpose are not diametrically opposed. You can do both. And really, when you look at convenings like WEF and other convenings that happen, certainly a lot of convenings under the UN umbrella, it's really about how you can bring business to sit with the UN, to sit with governments and make those strategic investments for sustainable development. And so what we aim to achieve, and I joined 2 years ago and we have a new strategy that is really focused on, first of all, just really getting back to what the core principles are. What should business do around the climate crisis and the environmental opportunities? How does business respect and promote labor rights and human rights? And certainly, what role does business play in preventing bribery and anti-corruption? But amidst all of that, a responsible and sustainable business has to get involved in societal issues. A lot of research today, and speaking to business leaders, they know that there's an imperative to look beyond their P&L, to look beyond their industry and their sectors, but for business leaders to be responsive to all the issues that are going around and that are around them. I mean, business cannot succeed when society around it is failing. And I think it's imperative on business leaders to really take a look at the environments within which they operate, the impact they have on that environment, but also the changes that they can drive.
How can we eliminate greenwashing and make sure the companies are taking the right actions towards sustainability?
Yeah. That's an important one. Credibility and accountability is really key at this point in time for businesses. I think the world has shifted beyond accepting a simple financial report. There's a lot of discourse in the reporting world around more holistic, or sometimes they call it double or triple materiality reporting, where companies must be transparent about their internal governance, their corporate governance. They must be transparent about their footprints. They must be transparent around what happens in their supply chains. And that's really critical to avoiding, as you say, greenwashing, blue washing, whatever kind of washing there is. Lots going on in the world. Typically this kind of reporting has been voluntary. Increasingly, and led by a lot of effort within the EU, there's a lot of mandatory requirements that are coming up and a lot of due diligence requirements. And we, at the Global Compact, definitely support reporting. We have our own unique reporting platform. We're not a reporting standard, but we do require our businesses to report into us. But we fully support the idea that companies do need to be transparent, and then we speak to the broader stakeholder environment around what they do. It's not enough to just be a strong, financially robust company. We need to know what happens within your company and within your operations.
And of course, we've talked about the world facing multiple crises at the moment. How is the war in Ukraine affecting ESG?
It's a big one. I think the war, as the pandemic is a moment for reflection. I think, again, the world is trained on, our eyes are trained on this one issue. Not just obviously the political ramifications of the war, but certainly the short and longer term implications. In the short term, we see the displacement that's happening. We're seeing the destruction of economies. In the long term, we see the potential for a food crisis, an agriculture crisis, an energy transition crisis, and actually the destruction of social fabric, which I think is probably one of the hardest things to rebuild. What does it mean for us within the Global Compact and certainly within the UN family is, first of all, to continue to see how we can support the rebuild of these systems. And again, private sector comes in really critical in that.
How can the private sector, businesses step up and help through the crisis to make sure that their ESG projects and initiatives actually work?
Yeah. A couple of things, and actually just yesterday we had a great discussion with the president of Poland and a couple of key businesses that are really key, Poland being, neighboring Ukraine and really supporting a lot of the efforts at present. One is to go in with a view that you're doing a long-term investment or long-term support into an economy. The rebuild around infrastructure. We have the opportunity to look at green technology solutions, green infrastructure rebuild, and look at, for example, if you're rebuilding an energy system, how much focus you put on renewables versus on fossil fuels and other sources of energy. I think the opportunity to make sure that these investments are inclusive, sustainable, and really support, the direction that we're going in the Sustainable Development Goals is really key. There's been a lot of discussion around that in terms of setting, Ukraine in a new model of a rebuild. It's not about building back better, it's about building forward with all of the promise that we have around sustainability at the heart of it.
Sanda, you're one of the most senior members here representing the United Nations. And there has been criticism about the relevance of the institution and how there's so much humanitarian suffering. What can be done, and what do you say to those people?
Right. The types of challenges that we face in the world today, I think cannot be solved or addressed by one entity. What the UN does and what the UN, we espouse a set of principles that I think are globally important and have global support. We're very clear that peace and security, the humanitarian response, and sustainable development are critical. But what the UN does, both globally and at the country level, is convene multiple partners around the table. So we can convene government, private sector, certainly the various UN entities and bodies, to collectively innovate and drive forward all of these solutions. And I think the UN continues to do that extremely well, and drive solutions that are both, as I say, focused on peace and security in the long term, focused on humanitarian response, and focused on long-term development. And it does really require all actors coming to the table and bringing our various strengths and comparative advantages to solve these solutions.
You've also been discussing the challenges facing small and medium enterprises. Tell me about that and in what way they're vital for growth and resilience.
SMEs are critical in any economy. The statistics will tell us that about 60 to 70% of any economy in the developed world or in an emerging or developing economy is driven by the SME sector. SMEs provide extensive employment opportunities, particularly for women and young people. And so, just by virtue of that, I think the SME sector is critical. They're either standalone businesses or actually they provide inputs and supplies into larger multinationals. So I don't think we can underestimate the role that SMEs play in economies. I think one of the things we've seen both through the pandemic and we continue to see through this war and beyond is the fragility of the SME system and the need for us to really look at how we can provide resilience. And that resilience is around things such as, providing platforms for SMEs to converge and have coherence, looking at providing an enabling environment for SMEs to operate, what are the policies around SME work, access to finance, access to capital and technology, access to markets has always been critical for the SME agenda. So I actually sat on a panel yesterday where we really discussed what the opportunities are to support the growth of the SME sector, innovation around that, building resilience, looking at digital and how much opportunity digital platforms, digital lending, digital financing can provide in terms of stimulating and supporting the SME sector.
Well, of course, you're also joining a group of leading CEOs here in Davos to announce a corporate sector-led strategy to build water resilience. What do you hope to achieve from that?
Well, that was exciting. We had a great board meeting yesterday with our Water Resilience Coalition, and we, together with the Pacific Water Institute and leading organizations such as GAP, Diageo, Starbucks, Ecolab, and many others, we're really looking at addressing the fact that actually close to 2 billion people do not have access to water around the world. 2.2 billion don't have access to safe drinking water. And statistics are that by 2030, if nothing critical is done, demand will exceed supply by over 40%. And so what this ambitious group of CEOs in this coalition have pledged to is really being able to address close to 300 million people's needs around water scarcity, looking at water availability, water quality, and water access. Also aiming to look at, providing sustainability and resilience support to water basins around the world, looking at supporting over 100 water basins to make sure that communities can have access to water. It's driven by the fact that a lot of corporates obviously use water as a key input. But at the same time, technologies have allowed a lot of these companies to be more efficient around how they use that water. For example, Levi's now uses 96% less water to create a pair of jeans. So there's lots of technology driving efficiency, but now we see a group of leading corporates also wanting to make sure that water sources are sustainable in the long term.
The theme of this year's forum is history at a turning point. Do you feel it's a turning point for the Global Compact?
I think it's a turning point for everybody. The sub-theme goes into government and corporate responsibility. And so, along the lines of both public and private sector, I think the crises of the last 2.5, close to 3 years have been a deep inflection point. I think that the systems, the policies, the ways of working that we had before certainly are not the ones that are going to take us forward. We're dealing with a whole new type of challenge and crisis that have brought the world together in many ways that we hadn't anticipated. Think about it. We spent 2 years working at home. We spent 2 years relying on digital. We spent 2 years, having to rethink a lot of the ways that our economies, our jobs, our workplaces functioned. And it's suddenly been a deep reflection point for many. And so I think the theme is very apt. But what is really critical is what actions do we come out with that are going to really take us forward from this turning point. And I really think that really should be the focus of WEF and any future convenings. It's about what are the actions that we're going to do to avoid us not getting stuck in the challenges we're facing today, but also how resilient, what types of resilient plans can we make that will help us address future challenges that may arise.
Talking of action, Sanda, for those who haven't yet, how would you encourage business leaders to take their first steps towards ESG and sustainability?
Well, I think the first thing is to really reflect on why, because the why question is one that fundamentally will help you avoid, we talked about the pitfalls of greenwashing or bluewashing. You've got to understand what your business purpose is and what your business wants to contribute to the broader ecosystem. I think that's very critical. I think the second is to be in good company. And I think, organizations such as the UN Global Compact and others provide you the tools, the resources, the capacity building support, the advocacy platforms to really see what benefit ESG work can bring to your own business and certainly to the ecosystem. But the third, I think, is to truly understand, as I said, that business cannot succeed when society is failing. So business leaders today need to have a much broader view of what the role and purpose of business is in society.
With the current crises and challenges around the world, do you still feel that the Sustainable Development Goals are a priority? Can they be achieved?
You know, I'd answer that by saying, if we didn't have the goals, then what? What would we be focusing on to be able to address a lot of the crises that we see all around the world? The goals, I think, put our eye and our focus on some of the very key issues that we need to have a better quality of life, irrespective of where you sit in the world. And they still have relevance. I think we've lost momentum over the last couple of years, but we certainly continue to see the need to keep our eyes focused on these key goals. And I just want to stress again that, you know, governments do play a role in providing the public financing and the enabling environment obviously at the nation state level, but private sector can really play a catalytic role in terms of innovation, in terms of access to markets and citizenry, in terms of, you know, transformative financing. And I think that really, that mix of the public-private together is what I think is really catalytic to driving these goals forward. A lot of the Sustainable Development Goals align anyway with national development agendas. A lot of them align with the business agendas of very progressive businesses. So it's really just an alignment and focusing on what the key issues are for the world.
Just finally, Sanda, what is your vision for the UN Global Compact, and do we have a sustainable future?
We must live in hope that we have a sustainable future. I don't think you and I want to leave the world any less better off than we found it. I think there's a lot riding on a lot of key decisions being made by the political class, by private sector, and certainly by citizens. And there's an imperative right now to be able to address and sustain what a sustainable future looks like in very many angles. My vision for the Global Compact is that certainly, and reflecting back on Kofi Annan's words, that we'll continue to put that human face on the global market. I think business plays such a critical role in society today that it must continue to be that human face around whatever shape of business you take, large business or small business. Business creates jobs, business builds markets, business builds economies, but at the same time, business also has its own externalities that we want to address. It impacts the environment, it can drive or build bridges around inequality. And I think well-run businesses can provide a lot of innovative solutions to move forward. So we live in hope. I think we live in optimism. We have seen progress in many areas. And I think we just need to be able to accelerate that progress around some of the key issues.
Sanda Ojiambo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.